So now I want to talk about trimming. For those of you who have never trimmed anything before, it's really important to study how firm this has become. So this pot, it still has some wiggle in it. Notice I'm turning it oval slightly. It's flexing without cracking the wall. It's firm enough that I'm not leaving any marks when I'm touching it, but it's soft enough that I can still kind of smear it a little bit. It's waxy. I like to put things on a spectrum of cheese. So this is no longer like cream cheese. It's not even close to brie anymore. It's more of like a cold, hard cheddar. And if you don't know your cheeses, then you're just gonna have to feel this out. So before I start trimming, something like this, I really want to just study its thickness. You know, it's pretty thin all the way down to where my thumbnail is marking, right down at that transition from the wall to the floor. It becomes a little thicker, and I want to put some kind of a foot ring in here. So I'm just going to feel this out first and try to identify that it's a little thicker here than it is in the wall, and it's a lot thicker here than it is in the wall because my interior is kind of curved, so I want my outside to kind of follow that same curve. Okay? So I'm just going to make sure that my wheel head's relatively clean. I'm going to place this right in the center of this circle. There's a circle on this wheel, and these circles are all true to the center, so I might as well put this piece in the center. That's going to make this a lot easier too. You need to identify even the little tiniest bit of off-centeredness. So I can feel like right here it's a little bit closer to me, and it could scoot towards the center of the wheel. So one way to do that is to just time it and tap it in there, which is a developed skill. You could tap it into center, or you can mark with your needle tool. And here I'm keeping my needle still, and where the pot meets the needle identifies that this mark starting here and ending here, this half of the pot needs to scoot towards the center of the wheel. So I'm going to face that mark towards me. Now the center of that mark is facing me. I'm going to place my palms on the wheel, and I'm gently going to cradle this pot with my fingers, and I'm barely going to shift it towards the center of the wheel because I don't think it needs to move much. It just needs to move a little bit. So I slid that about a millimeter or two. Now I'm going to try that mark again, keeping that needle as still as possible. If your mark goes right over your old mark, just move down a little bit. So here it appears that I could still move that way a little bit. Marking a different spot. So there's some fingerprints in the bottom of this cup, but for the most part, it's pretty centered. If I want it to stay in the center, I'm going to roll a coil of soft clay, maybe a little bit thicker than my fingers. Then I'm going to just break this up into 3 pieces. I'm going to stop the wheel and gently keeping this thing in the center, I'm going to fasten this coil to 1/3 of the lip, fasten this coil to another 1/3 of the lip. Really, it's not fastening to the lip, it's fastening down to the wheel. Notice I'm squishing down with my thumb into the wheel, and I'm really not smushing it into the lip at all. So once you've centered it and secured it to the wheel, then we can use tools such as, well, this one is one tool I like to use. My other tool was around here somewhere. Oh, it's over here. Really, these metal tools are best when your clay is firm and not sticky wet. Sticky wet clay sticks to metal, but a firm leather will peel right off this metal. My goal in making this foot is to identify like a ring. I'm going to make the foot somewhere around that diameter. Maybe a little bit smaller than that. So once I've clearly identified where I want my foot, my first move is to rotate the narrow end of this down into the clay. My left hand is keeping this light pressure, and I'm going to leave this thicker until the very end. First, I'm going to remove some of the thickness out here near the hip. So I cut down and into it. I'm not really wanting to go beyond that line that I've created, but I do want to get down to take some of this meat off. Next, I like to use this bigger rounded edge to take some of this other stuff off. Notice I'm resting my elbow on my leg. I'm resting my left hand on my pot. I'm touching my thumb to my left hand, and I'm even using my index finger to brace all of this. The handle is in my palm. My index finger's on my blade, my other index finger's on my blade. I'm really trying to keep that blade from cutting a hole in my pot. I need to use the edge because it's the sharp part of the blade, and it'll cut through the clay, but as it's cutting the clay, it wants to sort of dive down into the clay, so you really have to hold on to this tool and keep it from just diving right into your pot, you know? All those skills you've developed in centering something, your ability to hold still and not be influenced by the clay wanting to push your hand around, that same sort of theory is applied here. You don't want this clay to push your tool around. You want your tool to kind of peel off any lumps and bumps, thicknesses. Okay? So I'm getting pretty close to seeing that curve. I was looking for that curve on the inside of the bowl. Now I want to make that curve on the outside. So I know I can go a little deeper there and sort of flatten this off. You have all these options, you know, like there's this narrow part of the loop. You've got this broad part of the loop. And then as you're getting close to finishing things, you can choose to either leave these marks. You know, one of them makes a narrow mark, one of them makes a broader mark. Or you can sort of scrape off all of those marks with the flat, longer edge of this tool. So once I'm satisfied with this curve, not only in the way that it's shaped, and not only in its texture, but I also want to be satisfied with its thickness. And it sounds and feels to be about the same thickness here as it is here. So my goal is to try and create an even wall thickness. So something even less than 1/4 inch is really what I'm aiming for. Next, I'm going to dive into the center and peel away the clay inside of this foot. So again, I'm stable with my elbow on my leg. I'm going to touch my pot with my left hand. I'm going to touch my tool with my left hand. I'd sometimes do it like this. However you want to stabilize that tool, just dig in. Your blade's going to be at an angle. You know, the angle's going to want to cut and dive and pull your blade down through this floor. This floor is already about 3/8 of an inch thick. I'm trying to get it down to be less than 1/4, so really I'm taking just a little tiny bit of clay out of the very center right there. And I'm moving that small end of that loop towards my foot ring. It's kind of like the needle on a record player. You just go if you go pretty slow, it eventually I don't know if this is the end of the album or the beginning of the album. You come to a stopping point. And then another option in this is this tool, which has a rounded point, which is a lot like these rounded points. So I rarely use this side, but I do like this angled side. You have a right angle on that tool. And I can kind of get into these edges. Notice I'm grabbing the top of this tool with my left thumb. I'm holding the bottom of this tool like a pencil, dragging it in. I used to just blow these things away, but I can't do it with my mask on. I would prefer a dry brush. This one's wet, so it just made all that stick. Maybe this is a good place for this tool. Just want to reduce the thickness of my foot. Something smooth and hard could be used to finish the bottom of your foot ring. And that's how you trim a foot like that. I guess I should show you. Getting this off the wheel. I could probably just lift it straight out of there. I want to feel all of this. I've got a finger on the inside and a finger on the outside. I just want to make sure it's all the same thickness. Now I could either just sign my name with a stick, put a stamp on it. I've been using this stamp lately. It's got my initials backwards, and it's got the number 20 backwards. And that way when you stamp it on there, it leaves it forwards. Anyways, you want to put your identification on there. This is really smooth and flat. It's got a burnished edge that's beveled. That bevel is very important. It's a lot like the bevel on these cylinders. These cylinders have been rolled and tapped as well. And when you set these down on the table, you'll notice that tiny shadow underneath those edges. Those little shadows under the edges are very important. They look like they're hovering, not stuck to the table. It will help when glazing.